Well, it's 4 o'clock by my device, which means it's time for office hours. I'm going to do my normal thing of starting to chat and kind of watch the stats to see if people are checking in. Check the comments over here. So if you can see/hear, let me know. I see Janice from Spain, and Lorianne is here as well. If you can give me the thumbs up that you can see and hear everything okay, that would be great. Because it's always, just want to make sure. I always think it's ironic, though, where I'm saying, if you can see and hear, because if you can't, how would you comment? Anyway, you know what I mean. So let's see what we got. Janice says can see and hear, so does Lorianne. Awesome. That's always a good start when the first couple of comments say, and Marlene's giving me a thumbs up as well, so 3 for 3. All right. Awesome. So we had office hours last week, of course, because of my travel the week before, so this is a couple of weeks in a row. So I originally thought probably won't get as many questions, but now I've got a bunch, so that's good. It's always good to answer people's questions. So as always, if something comes up during the broadcast, we can add that to the list as well. So I'm seeing Lonnie as well saying sound is really good. Great. And Stephen Swanson can see in here. Perfect. If you're a first timer for office hours, let me know where you're checking in from so we can see. We've got a bunch of people that are usually here and then a bunch of others that join in when they can. I see a few eyeballs stacking up here, so looks like we are good to go. That's fantastic. Excellent. All right, so let's jump in. The first question I want to address is from David, who said, or asked, is there a simple way to combine? It has 2 documents, and he wants to take a group of layers from one document and put them in the other, so combining them in some way. Well, you certainly can, and it works both if the layers are independent or if they're actually in a group. So let me show you that now. So here's a document that's got a bunch of layers in it. The first thing I would say is if you're going to do this operation, then it's worth taking a moment this is the document that I want everything to end up in, so my, let's call it destination document. So it's a good idea to spend just a moment looking at where you're at. So right now my very bottom layer is the one that's active. So if I was to go to my other document and drag them in, everything would come in at this level or at this point in the layer stack. So for now I'm going to click at the top because I want to just make sure, initially at least, that this group is going to come in on the top. So then I go to another document. All I've done here is I've got layers. They're all in a group. So that makes it easier, but it's not necessary. All it means is if you didn't have them in a group, you would have to make sure they were all selected by clicking on the first one and then shift-clicking on the bottom one. But one of the benefits of them being in a group is, in effect, they are already all selected. So now if I tap the letter V for my Move tool, and I'll just click anywhere in here, click and hold, drag up to the other document. I'm going to hold on the Shift key because I want to make sure they're nicely lined up. And when I let go, you'll see there's that group that has been copied over. And it's copied over at that point in the stack, because as I mentioned, I made sure I had clicked on this top layer to begin with. But of course, I can move it anywhere. I can now dig inside and turn layers on and off, do whatever I want very easily. So that's probably the simplest way. Anytime in Photoshop you're trying to combine things or copy them, anytime you can do it actually by dragging as opposed to copying and pasting, it's always better. Because when you copy something in Photoshop and paste it, the information you've copied sits on the clipboard, taking up valuable RAM in your operating of Photoshop. So dragging and dropping like I did there frees everything up. There's no strain on the RAM. So yes, there are times where you might think, oh, I'll just copy and paste this. That's fine. But what I would suggest is once you've finished pasting and you know you're done, and this is not specific to this example, but if I haven't, so I'll have to just do like this. Copy merge. So let's pretend I had pasted somewhere. Now, once I'm done, I'm going to go to this under the edit menu, purge the clipboard, because I don't want it taking up valuable space. So there will be occasions where it's probably easier to copy and paste, but if you can, I would suggest dragging and dropping as much as you can. And you can drag to copy layers by holding down the Option or Alt keys. There's lots of occasions where copying and pasting is actually not necessary. The one exception would be things like if you're copying a bunch of text, obviously you'd need to copy and paste that, but that would have a minimal effect on your RAM. Okay, question 2. Lou wrote a couple of comments in the Facebook group about putting JPEGs in a slideshow and was trying to reduce the file size and was wondering about using in the JPEG save dialog box, those numbers 1 to 12. We talked about this a little bit last week, but I want to follow up to say the best way, in my opinion, to reduce the size of a file is by physically changing the dimensions, keeping that quality as high as you can, and changing the size. So, for example, you have a file you might have opened, and it might be, let's just say, 4,500 pixels wide by whatever the math is, let's say 3,000 something. That's a pretty big file just to use on a slideshow. It's going to be very large. So I would say, if possible, and I asked this question to Lou, and he wasn't able to determine this, but in the software that you're using for your slideshow, if it's possible to determine what the actual page size is, or screen size, if you will, that would be the ideal. But if you can't, then I would do an experiment, say, well, I'm going to use the image size command and make a copy of my document at, say, 1280 by 720, and then bring that into your slideshow software and see how it fits. It might be a little bit small. So the other option is to make the height 1080, which is the kind of a high resolution. When you hear people talk about 1080p, that means high resolution monitor. That should be big enough. And the only exception to that, and this is, so let me start again with that. 1080p to me should be a good size to use for most photographs. However, if you have a photograph that you want to have it appear and then enlarge, you need that file to be bigger to be able to handle the enlargement. In your software that does your slideshow, there's probably an option to scale it or animate it or something and make it bigger. Well, you need to, not artificially, it's like making things bigger in Photoshop. If you just make them bigger, they won't look very good. So if you bring in a file that's bigger, as big as you need, or a little bit bigger to enlarge, sorry, that got confusing. If you know you're going to need to enlarge one, then make it a little bit bigger. Okay, so let me just show you a couple things concerning this. Let me get to a bridge. So let me the preview panel. So here's an original file, and you can see it's the pixel dimensions are 4288 by 2848. Now we're going to ignore the fact that it says 300 pixels per inch. That has absolutely no influence on what we're doing. But you can see the file size is 9.5 megabytes, roughly. So that's still fairly big. Okay, so then I took the same file and saved it with that quality setting of 8. So this top one, the quality setting in JPEG was 12. This is 8, which is about as low as I'd want to go in terms of quality. And you can see that's made a significant difference. It's gone from 9.4 megs to 2.42. But then I took that same thing and I said, well, let's make one that's the size of that 1080. So it's 1080 by 1626, which is that 16 by 19... 16 by 9, I guess it is, a ratio that we use in things like monitors. And you can see this one is 1.86. Now in this one, I'm pretty sure I kept the JPEG quality at 12. So if I had resized it to 1080 and made the JPEG setting to, say, 10, it might have made that size that much smaller. So one of the things that we can do here, let me get rid of this preview panel for a second. Oops, that wasn't the best way to do that. Okay. So let's say for the sake of argument that I have these two files that I want to resize down for my slideshow. I'm doing it in Bridge. I'll show you in a moment how you can do it in Photoshop. We're going to go to Tools, Photoshop, and then Image Processor. Now it jumps back to Photoshop. And then we're going to say, all I want to do is I want to save as JPEG, and I'm going to resize so the height is 1080. And let's say we could, in here, put the quality to 10. And I've selected two images from Bridge. If I had X number selected, so 25, 30, whatever number, I would suggest, by the way, let me just pause and say, anytime you're doing this kind of operation of doing a batch process to a bunch of images, I would try doing it on one or two first, just to make sure it works the way you want. You'll notice it's saying save in same location. What that's going to do is create a new folder in the same location where you started. So now I hit run. It's going to go through and say there's the first one and the second one, and done. And now if we go back to Bridge, we'll see in here somewhere there's a JPEG folder, and now I have JPEG versions of those that were resized, and the resolution is a little bit smaller. And let's just see what it says in terms of size. Oh, nice and small. Look at that. 239K. That seems small. I guess I forgot to change that other setting to the other setting was set to 1,000. That's why they got so small. So that was my bad on that one. Let me go back and show you what I should have done, because I didn't do that very well. I won't run the whole process, but at least show you image processor. I should have made sure that let's see, the height. Not sure if I can just leave it blank. I don't think I can, because yeah. Let's just see. I'm going to try that. I haven't really thought this one through, but let's just take a quick test. This is exactly the reason why I said let's do a test with just a couple of images first, just to be sure. There we go. So that's what I needed to do. So put 1080 in for the height, and then a bigger number for the width. Now it's still nice and small. It's still 472K as a JPEG file. So hopefully that wasn't too confusing with my mistake there. But so here are the things I would suggest if you're doing anything with where the destination for your files is like a slideshow software, is just do a couple of tests. Save 2 or 3 versions of the same file in different sizes. Bring it in and see how it looks in there. And if it's the right size, then you know those are the settings you want to use from then on moving forward for the rest of the files. And then you can do a batch using that image processor. Now I started in Bridge because I wanted to pick specific images. But let me just show you, if you are in Photoshop, you can go to File, Scripts, Image Processor, and then the only difference is you're going to select a folder, so that means assuming everything in that folder you want to affect. So the main reason I use Bridge is I can pick and choose, whereas in this method you have to choose a particular folder to do it. Okay, so hopefully that all made sense for you. All right. Lorianne's asked about, in the Photoshop window, there's a document size you see here that shows you 2 different sizes. So in this one it's saying 11.9 megs / 107.7 megs. So these are kind of, I would say, fairly rough estimate numbers. I wouldn't rely on them too much. It's just an estimate to tell you that the layer document is the bigger number on the right. If you were to flatten it, it's the number on the left. Now, that doesn't take into account saving as a JPEG with compression or anything else, so that's a very rough number to give you a rough idea of where you're at. But I wouldn't put too much emphasis on it, and I certainly wouldn't make too many decisions based on those to say, oh, that's the right size, I'm going to use those numbers. They are just a fairly accurate estimate. Okay? All right. let's get rid of some of this stuff we don't need. All right, the next question came from Lonnie, who said in a previous video I'd done about putting a photo inside text, and she wondered if you could do the same thing with video. And the cool thing is, yes, you can. If you have either the extended version of Photoshop CS6 or just about any version of Photoshop CC. So I'm going to make a new document that's 1080 by 720. That's a standard video size. And let's just make our background black. So we need to have this timeline showing. If you don't, you'd have to go to the window menu and bring down to where it says timeline. And then we're going to click this button that says create video timeline. All right. And then this point, we're going to, right here, you can see there's a little tiny icon. It looks like kind of a film strip. We click on that and it says add media. So then we're going to find whatever movie we want to put in. It'll take QuickTime and MP4 and all those things. And let's just, okay, so now we've got this showing. So if we want this black to always be there, which we're going to want, we're going to have to pull this video up here. Oh, that's because it's part of the same group. Okay, so pull the black one down. Sorry, that was my bad. Let's see, let's make this. This is the problem with the smaller screen that I'm showing here. So I want to make this black background the same length. All right, and then we go, you can see there's the video moving around. Okay, and then we take our type tool and create some type. So we need to shuffle the order just the same way we do when we're putting a photo inside type. And we're going to Option or Alt click in between. So now the type is inside, or the video, sorry, is inside the type. And now you can see, there we go. So I'm just manually pulling, because anytime you do video in here, it always takes a minute or two to kind of render. That's what those little tiny green dots are there, is this thing rendering. So if I hit the play button, whoops, sorry about that. I forgot I had the volume on there. Sorry, I hope that didn't jolt anyone too much. So one of the things that's really cool about doing video in Photoshop is, even though it's video and there are a few different rules, a lot of the basic principles we do of like adding adjustment layers or using clipping mask with type or anything of that nature, the same rules apply. It just happens to be done in video. And it just takes an extra step or two to kind of get used to the way the layers panel looks, and you have the video layers in there. If you haven't already taken a look at it, I have a fairly extensive course on video in Photoshop on the site, and you can look at that to get even more details. I'm not sure if that clipping mask thing is in there. I don't remember, because it was done a while back, but a lot of the basics of how we do video in Photoshop are in there as well. Okay. Sally asked a question. She posted a screen capture of her layer styles panel and just sort of questioned why it looked the way it did. And honestly, I don't know the answer to that one. On the Macintosh platform, I've not seen that happen, where it looks like different kind of colors like that. So I'm afraid I can't really offer any insights as to why things are looking the way they do. So I'm sorry, but the good news is, obviously, it doesn't have any impact on the operation of layer styles. Okay. Jeff asked, or mentioned, that he was having problems with Adobe Camera Raw slowing down a fair bit, and wondered if there were any things you could do to speed it up, and particularly wondered if it was anything like the video card. On the Macintosh platform, which is where Jeff was talking about, let me take a step back. Often you'll see Adobe say things like, check your video card driver, make sure it's current. Well, on the Macintosh platform, that's just built into the operating system. So as long as your operating system is current, then there really shouldn't be any difference. Now, I haven't tried this, but I'm going to offer a suggestion because I know in Lightroom this is something that people have seen has improved their speed in Lightroom. So we can do the same thing in Camera Raw. So to get to the Camera Raw preferences, we actually go in, we can do it in Photoshop and go to Preferences, and then down at the very bottom you'll see Camera Raw exists. So these are the settings for Camera Raw, and the Camera Raw cache is set to 5 gigabytes. And a suggestion would be try a number like 20 and see if that makes any difference. Now, you'll have to try it and see. You may not see any difference. It may be even worse. I don't know. This is a suggestion that I'm making based on when I saw Jeff's question and I did a bit of research to see what people were saying. This was a potential solution in Lightroom, was to go into the Lightroom preferences and change a similar setting for RAW. So it would, by logic, suggest that perhaps Camera Raw will be the same. Other than that, keeping everything current with versions and everything is about the only other thing I can think of that will make any difference. Okay, let's see. Hopefully that gives at least something to try, because it's always a tough one when people ask questions about things like speeding things up, because there's so many factors in terms of the machine you're on and how much RAM you have and all those other things. But hopefully that will be something to try. Lorianne asked about a layer style function, that a setting that's called Layer Knocks Out Drop Shadow. So let me get back here, collapse this timeline, and let's just take our type tool. Don't need to be quite that big. Okay, so if we go to drop shadow, you can see that I have a drop shadow, and we're only seeing it where a drop shadow would naturally be outside the type. So if I go into here and turn that off, it's not really doing what I expected. Normally I was going to say I would just leave that on, because if you didn't have that on, the way that the layer appears is going to act a little differently. So I may have to look into that one a little more, because I was going to say I've never thought of turning that off, because that's the way you want it. You want the layer to show and the shadow to be around it. So I'm not sure why it's not. I don't really see a difference. Okay, so I'm going to have to look at that one a little further to try and see what it is, because my initial impression is to say you want that to be on, but turning it off didn't seem to make a whole lot of difference in this case. Oh, wait a minute. Let me try one more thing. I'll switch back here in a moment. No, that's not going to make any difference. Okay, I see. All right. Hold on one second. Now I know what it is. Yeah, okay. Let me go back here, and I've just realized I've forgotten all this time to check my comments. I see Tom is here, and okay, I'll get to those questions in a second. Okay, so back to this one. So the question was about the drop shadow, and layer knocks out drop shadow. So when I was turning it on and off, nothing was happening. So this is where it makes a difference. If you lower the fill opacity to 0 and then go back, you'll see you want layer knocks out drop shadow, because if it's off, you're just seeing a big drop shadow, which I suppose you might want just a big blurry shadow with nothing in front of it. I don't know. So that's where it actually comes into play. I think the term knocks out should have been a clue to me, because with the function in Photoshop called knockout, you only actually see it if you have lowered the fill opacity. So that's where it comes into play. All right. So let's cancel that. Okay, so let me go back here and get this document. So Janice asked the question, said, is there a fast way to move a layer from the bottom to the top of the stack very quickly? And the answer is yes. If you have the layer selected, there are keyboard shortcuts to either select a layer above or below or move the layer itself. So we want to do Command on the Macintosh or Control bracket key, and you watch my layers panel. You'll see how it's moving up the layer stack. If I press Command or Control and the left bracket key, it goes back down. But if I want to go all the way to the top, it's Command Shift or Control Shift right bracket, and it jumps all the way to the top with that layer still active. Command or Control and the Shift key left bracket pops it all the way down again. Now, if you want to just select the next layer up or down, it's Option or Alt right bracket, and that will jump you up to the next layer. Holding on the Shift key goes all, oops, all right. That will select multiple layers. Okay, so the Option or Alt key just activates or selects the layer. Command or Control actually moves it with those bracket keys. So here's an example of something where you might look at that and go, that was really complicated. I'll never remember those shortcuts. So what I would suggest you do for situations like this is I've been using this layer document for lots of demonstrations because I know it has a bunch of layers of different types. So I would suggest it's not a bad idea to build yourself a little sample layer document that has a background layer, or maybe a smart object, whatever it is, a couple of type layers, some shapes, and then anytime you want to try something like this, you already have a layer document you just open and then try this shortcut and see which one works, because then it doesn't matter if you press the wrong thing, because it's not a document that's crucial that you don't want to wreck, because all you're doing is experimenting. Okay? So let me jump back here and see. Tom said, do you have a recommendation for the best high-res monitor for editing in Photoshop? I'm going to be honest and say I am, unfortunately, the worst person to ask about hardware, because I don't really spend any time doing that kind of research, and I have my iMac with the built-in monitor that I like very much, and I know people that have tried all kinds of other monitors, so I'm afraid I'm not the person to ask for any recommendation from a hardware standpoint, with the possible exception of Wacom tablets, because I use those all the time. But other than that, monitors, printers, things of that nature, I'm afraid I'm not a great person to ask, because I've just haven't done the research or haven't spent any time kind of gathering information in that area. So I'm sorry I can't provide any great detail for you there, Tom. So Lorianne, you said you were having the same question as Jeff, so hopefully between you can try that setting in the Camera Raw cache to see if it creates any improvement for what you were doing in Photoshop. Lorianne says, iMacs have the Retina display, which is probably the best, right? Well, again, it's a personal choice. I mean, there's certainly a lot of people find that the quality of a Retina display is very, very good. It depends on the kind of work you're doing. Certainly, I've heard other people who use other monitors that they like as much or better. So technically, from a technical standpoint, I'd say, yeah, it probably is the best kind. But again, I'm not the ideal person. I love my setup here. It does everything I need it to. It's getting a little... Oops, I shouldn't even say it because it's right beside me. It can hear me talking about it because it's getting a little old. So it might be time, but shh, we're not gonna go down that road. Because as soon as you say that, it's like, oh, my laptop's working great, and then 2 days later, so. But I'm. It's funny because I spend every working moment working in Photoshop and related tools, and yet I have relatively antiquated tools compared to what's out there today. This my main iMac that I do all my video training on. Everything else is probably, I don't know, 8 years old, which is pretty old in the world of technology. So now I've just ruined it. Might as well just order a new one today. So that is all the questions that we had ahead of time, plus a couple of others that came in, but I'll give you a few more moments. If any other questions are at hand, you can add them in the comments, and I will give you an opportunity to type in there. The next office hours will be the first Wednesday in August, which will be August. That's June, Dave. Get the right month. August 7th would be the next office hours, August 7th. So, as I always say at this point, don't feel like you have to wait until like the day before. If you have a question that comes up later today or tomorrow or on the weekend, put that question in the Office Hours Facebook group so you don't forget, and then it'll be in the queue for the next time that we get together as Office Hours. If you have a particular image that you're struggling with, there's certainly nothing wrong. In fact, it's a pretty nice idea to share the image in the Facebook group, and if it's something I think I can help you with, then I'll ask you for a higher quality version, typically, if I can, and show you some of the suggestions how I might approach it. That's always fair game as well, and not necessarily just ones that have a major problem, just something that you're trying to improve upon or whatever it might be. That's certainly fine as well. Lorianne asked about doing layer comps. I'll show you the quick version, but there are certainly videos on the site on that topic area. So basically you need to have the layer comps panel showing, and at first it's going to look like this. It's going to say last document state, and then when you click the new button, you're going to have the opportunity to name it, and I would name it something that makes sense, like in this case, let's say all layers. And then initially, I have a feeling that it might look like this. I think, I'm not sure. But we want it to apply to everything, the visibility, the position, and the appearance of everything that are all of our layers. So I click OK. Then I say, for example, maybe I don't want these other layers, and I want to take that type layer and I want to move it over here. So now I put something like large photo only moved type. Something, again, that makes sense to you. There's also an opportunity here to write comments, so you can write yourself, I moved the type to the top left-hand corner or something like that. Click OK. And then let's say we want these two, but I don't want that floral thing, so I'll hide that and call it, I'm just not going to bother naming it. So, and of course you can make as many as you want, and now anytime you want to look at the different layouts that you have created, you can either click beside one or use these arrow keys to kind of toggle through them and see what you're doing. And it's important to note that, let me just do one other thing here. If we take this layer, but let's change the blend mode to screen. That's when it says appearance layer style. Technically, blend modes like screen and things like opacity and things like that are also included in that. So now as I go through, I've got all these different versions, including one where it's changing the blend mode for me. And when you save your document as a PSD file, these layer comps get saved as part of it. So really it's just remembering different combinations, so it just saves you having to save as and so on. The only part that throws people off the first time is you have to remember layer comps can remember or in effect record visibility, position, and appearance, but not content. In other words, if you wanted that the word Jill and John to be in one typeface, but then have a different one with a different typeface, you'd have to create two different type layers. Because in other words, you cannot click on a layer comp and then change the type size or font, because it'll change in every other layer comp because it's just that one type layer. So anytime you're going to change anything, like I want a red logo or a blue logo, I'd have to have either two different logo layers or use adjustment layers to change them or something like that, because you can't do it based on just using commands like fill or changing the font or size and things of that nature. But that's kind of the only, I would say, exception to the rule of layer comps. Okay, let's see. Lorianne said, regarding Jeff's question about ACR cache, what is the meaning of the word cache, and should we press purge cache? I would not suggest pressing purge unless you're running into terrible problems where you can't get anything to work, because the cache is putting things in memory to, in essence. So, for example, when you open a file, instead of waiting for it to preview on the screen, it has that preview information kind of built in. That's kind of a vaguely non-technical way of saying it. So cache is it's the same thing. We have it in Photoshop as well, where it just speeds up the display of things. So generally you want to have a cache on, and you want to have it fairly big in preferences to allow more information in there. And like I said, the purge option is really only in a situation where, like I said, maybe just things are not working at all in Camera Raw. I would leave it untouched most of the time. It's one of those things where, just like, let me show you here in Photoshop, I showed you earlier that purged clipboard. All these other things like history and all means all available stuff. And here's like a video cache. So if I had been working on that waterfall inside the type and then purge this, the next time I went to play it, it would be really slow because it would have to regenerate the whole preview. So generally speaking, commands like purge are, I would say, reserved for I'm having a real problem and I've tried everything else, so maybe I'll try that. Hopefully that helps clarify a little bit. So in each new document, we are starting with an empty cache. Sort of, I guess. Well, I would word it this way. It's the kind of thing where day to day, it's not something you need to worry about. It just happens. And the only reason we're even talking about it right now is because of Jeff's question of things are running slowly, so maybe adjusting the cache would help. Normally, it's there. It's kind of like when you're browsing websites on the internet, and in the background, a history is being kept of sites you've been to, so if you go there again, it previews on your browser more quickly. It's the same kind of thing. It happens in the background, and we only have to worry about it if it's an issue, if it's not working properly. So hopefully that helps. Okay. I think we've reached we're right at 40 minutes, which is good because that's always the time that I suggest probably is the average length in time for office hours. So we will call it a day there. Don't forget, you can always, again, go to the Office Hours Facebook group to post things, or send me an email with Office Hours question in the subject, dcross@dcross.com. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time.